everybody. Thank you for coming, and thank you to Lauren, to Northern Film and Media, and to Newbridge for hosting the event. When I was asked by Lauren to chair this panel, I was really excited because residencies as an artist are very important to my own practice, and I'm actually starting a project based at Newbridge in March, which is about bringing artists and members of the culture sector into a residency in my studio space. So if you're interested, let me know. You're more than welcome to attend. But I was also interested in how the proliferation of residencies has come to somewhat define artistic practice in our times, existing across the cultural sector, and often as a means of income for artists. So I thought it was appropriate to kind of investigate a little bit further about what is the actual impact that residencies provide for artistic practice, as well as what are the expectations that the communities in which they take place have of artist residencies. So with the panel today, I should tell you, we're going to have a couple of artist presentations first, and then we'll go into the panel discussion. But on our panel today, we have Chris Paul Daniels, who is an artist and filmmaker who has been based here at the Newbridge Project for his residency for the past 3 weeks. So he'll be showing some of his previous work as well as some things he's been working on here. We have Rosalind McLaughlin, who's an artist and offers a different perspective on artist residencies, which she'll be talking about self-initiated artist residencies and her experience specifically with CERN in Geneva. We also have Susie O'Hara, who is a curator and arts producer who's currently working on her PhD at the University of Sunderland. And one of the key reasons I wanted Susie to participate, beyond the fact that she's just incredibly interesting, but she has this broad range of a background of working with local authorities and arts organizations that you'll often see fostering and sponsoring artist residencies from a different perspective than a traditional arts institution. Then we also have Remco de Blij, who represents a traditional artist institution in terms of being a curator at the CCA in Glasgow. So we'll have a breadth of knowledge and experience on artist residencies and their impacts on communities and practice. So that being said, I'm going to turn it over to Rosalind, who's going first to present her work.
Hello everyone. So I'm going to talk to you tonight about a residency I did last month. But first I want to talk a little bit about my work, just to put that in context. So I'm going to start by talking about a piece called Mind Machine. So I'm going to start with the title. A mind machine is it's something that you use that has a kind of pulsing rhythmic sounds and flashing lights, and generally people use it to alter their brainwaves. And mind machines are said to induce a state of relaxation, different states of consciousness, and so this is sort of being compared to like different states of meditation and shamanic exploration. So what you can see here, this is it's a sound frequency, 528 hertz, being played through water. The sound vibrations are causing the water to move, and that is creating this mandala-like pattern. The reason 528 hertz is significant is because it's one of the frequencies in the solfeggio scale, which also includes 5 other frequencies. In 1999, a man called Leonard Horowitz wrote a book called The Healing Codes of the Biological Apocalypse. And this is Leonard, and this is him. There we go. So, let's go back to Leonard. In his book, Leonard describes the discovery of 6 allegedly powerful sound frequencies by Dr. Joseph Puleo, which were apparently used in ancient Gregorian and Sanskrit chants. Along with others, they were lost centuries ago. And these chants and special tones were thought to give sort of spiritual blessings when sung in harmony. There are people today that believe that these ancient solfeggio frequencies, which are derived from numerology, can elicit a powerful positive response in those who listen to them. So if you Google solfeggio frequencies, then you'll probably be able to visit sites where you can buy things like this. These are special tuning forks that you can use to tune your body to specific frequencies like 528 Hertz or the other 5. What I find interesting about this and why I've decided to make Mind Machine is because I'm interested in the fictions and narratives that shape our understandings of the world. So if you believe in what Horowitz says and you listen to these frequencies, he says that you can live a life without stress and illness. And this is the list of all of the solfeggio frequencies and what they do. If the mathematical people in here, if you look at the numbers, there is a definite pattern. So how he got those numbers, not quite. It's not. He doesn't talk about that very much, but people people do believe in it, and I think that's what interested me. So when I made the work, Mind Machine, I wanted to make a piece of work that reflected on the claims that Horowitz made, but without applying any systems of judgment. So I didn't want to categorise what he was saying as either true or false. I was more interested in the fact that there are people that believe in it, and also that there's an industry that's built up around the solfeggio frequencies, which people buy into.
Just get rid of that.
That's good. So when I was designing the installation, I wanted to do it in a way that when people walked into the room, they could decide for themselves how they felt about those frequencies and whether they felt they were being healed or not. So this is a still of the installation. It was quite minimal. The room was dark, and what I did was I made a composition, like a soundtrack, out of the solfeggio frequencies and played them through speakers which then had water on top, and then that was filmed from above, and then a live a live projection was on the wall in the room, and there were like seating for you to go and sit and watch it. Can we play the film? Is that all right? So I'm just going to play you now a little excerpt of what people saw in the installation, in the hope that maybe tonight you'll go home healed.
You ready?
Yeah. So all the sounds that you were hearing then, they were all taken from that scale, so hopefully it's had a good effect. Chris, can we go back to the slides? Sorry, this isn't my computer. So for me, Mind Machine represents a turning point in my art practice, and to explain what I mean by that, I'm going to have to go back in time to my previous life as an archaeologist. This is Domingo. He's descended from the ancient Maya of Central America, and he's a folk healer. In this photo, he's conducting a rite to the Chuks, or the rain gods, by placing food offerings on an altar. This guy behind him, that's his friend, wearing a wig made of sisal, and he's blowing on a gourd, and he's enacting the rain god. And at the end of this ceremony, they share the bread and the drink after the deities have feasted on the spirit of the sacrifice. It was after witnessing this ceremony in Belize in Central America, where I was working as an archaeologist, that I began to feel uncomfortable about my part in the excavation of another culture's heritage, particularly as my team was largely made up of Europeans and Americans, albeit that we were employed by a Belizean archaeologist. At the time, I was working with Belize Valley Archaeological Reconnaissance, assisting them with their cave fieldwork. Over the course of 2 long summers, our team spent days exploring the Maya underworld, crawling through the maze-like cave systems called Xibalba, or Place of Fear, by the ancient Mayas, mapping it, excavating it, and cataloguing finds, and photographing the cave art. The first time I saw cave art, it struck me that rather than being purely representational like the drawings and paintings I was making at the time, as I was also studying life painting at the Slade by this point, the cave art was indicative of the ancient Mayas' beliefs and part of their underground rituals, which, judging by the human remains we found and the altars and the obsidian blades, were probably being used for sacrifice and bloodletting. So it didn't seem likely that the cave art associated with these remains was simply decorative, not least because it was located in dark and inaccessible places. More likely it had a ritual purpose, and this is something that interested me more than anything else. So following my experience of the Rite to the Rain Gods, and my time in the caves, and at a time when I was already questioning my future in archaeology, I decided to become an artist. I felt that above all, art was mysterious, irrational and numinous, and that's when I began to think of art as a way of making tangible our attempts to understand what it is to be human and the world around us. Talking of attempts to understand the world around us, I'd like to move on now to talk about the residency I went on last month to CERN, the world's largest particle physics laboratory. I first visited CERN in November 2011 when a friend of mine who's a particle physicist showed me around. I think that CERN is probably one of the most culturally significant places at the moment because it really is breaking the boundaries of what we know about the world and how we understand it. Following my visit in 2011, I became a bit obsessed with CERN, and I started reading all the books about particle physics that I could get my hands on, and it was at this point I set it as my goal to go there as an artist on a residency, and that's where I went last month. And I actually timed my residency there really well because at the moment the LHC, the Large Hadron Collider, which is the big machine that sends particles around a 27-kilometre tunnel, and they're going around at the speed of light, and then they collide, and this is what particle physicists are doing to try and understand the universe and what it's made of. And so the reason why it was a good time to go there was because that's all switched off at the moment because they're doing some maintenance on it. So what that meant was that Arts at CERN, who run the residency programme there, headed up by Ariane Koak, arranged for me to go underground, which is usually out of bounds because of the high levels of radiation. So I got to see these massive detectors that are a bit cathedral-like when you walk in. This is the Alice detector, and they're in these huge bunkers that are a bit like a James Bond set with massive big doors in the ceiling where they lowered it all down to build it. It's absolutely huge. So the Large Hadron Collider is the world's biggest particle accelerator. This tunnel is 27 kilometres long. It's so long that the particle physicists working on it have to use bicycles to cycle up and down to try and get to different places. And if you hadn't heard of it before, you might have heard of it back in 2008 when they switched it on and everyone thought that it was going to create a big bang and we were all going to get sucked towards Switzerland, which that would have happened, but it didn't. So although that apocalypse didn't happen. In 2012, which was the other year of the apocalypse, they discovered the Higgs boson, the so-called God particle. Though I should say that no self-respecting physicist would call it the God particle. Apparently that comes from a journalist misquoting a physicist calling the Higgs boson that goddamn particle. So this is an overview of CERN, of Geneva. It runs underneath the French and the Swiss border. So what happens is that these protons get sort of started up on this small circle and then they get shot around the big circle until the magnets that are sending them faster and faster until they get up to the right energy, and then they collide them into each other. And that's just another picture of it being below the ground. So this is like a representation of one of the collisions. So what the physicists are looking for are the new particles that are made when two protons collide into one another, and then they analyze all of that data. So they analyze it with 4 different detectors. It's ALICE, CMS, ATLAS and LHCb, and I went down to see all of those. So this is ATLAS. This is the biggest of all of them. It's it's so big that this is actually only quarter of, you couldn't actually see the whole thing when you went to go look at it. It was just too big. And this is CMS, which apparently is constructed a bit like an onion or an eye, depending on who you talk to. This is ALICE, which is the smallest one, still quite big. And this is LHCb. So all the experiments at the LHC are expected to address the most fundamental questions of physics, such as how the universe began and what it is made of. The fact is, if we think of our current understanding of the universe as a jigsaw, 95% of that is missing. So if you think of everything that you know about, everything you've ever seen in your entire life, and what you know about, that only amounts to 5% of the known universe. Many physicists think that 27% of the 95% is dark matter and 68% is dark energy, but they still don't know what dark energy or dark matter is. It's a complete mystery, and it's one of the hopes that the LHC will kind of get to the bottom of things. When I went to CERN, I was keen to talk to cosmologists, the storytellers of the quantum world. Cosmologists are the ones who are responsible for coming up with the theories in physics, like the Big Bang Theory. And this is Diego. I didn't actually take a photo of him, but he did help me set my white balance, so I put in a picture of him. When you're sat in front of a cosmologist, there's an overwhelming urge to ask them about life, the universe and everything. I think it's something to do with the fact that they know really complicated maths, and they talk about the beginning of the universe quite a lot. But you do find yourself asking questions like what happened before the Big Bang and things like that, but these are questions that the physicists can't answer, unfortunately, so they don't even try to. And I was surprised how calm and even poetic they were about that, since it throws me into a bit of an existential crisis. One of the specific things I wanted to discuss with cosmologists was about imagination and how imagination and creativity can help us make sense of the inexplicable. And at what point does a theory become a fact? And if there's no such thing as absolute truths, is it faith that will help us believe in scientific theories? And if so, how can that sit comfortably with scientific thinking? As a case in point, one of the current theories about the structure of our universe is that rather than being made up of point-like particles, it's actually made up of one-dimensional strings. And well, I won't go into it too much because I don't really understand it myself, but the beauty apparently of string theory is that there is a bit of a problem in particle physics in that the rules we have about the big things in the universe, like planets and galaxies, don't fit with the small things like electrons and protons. And so if string theory was correct, then you'd essentially have a unifying theory that brought those rules together, and you'd have one set of rules for both. And you know, that's the goal of physics, to have that unified theory. But the problem is that although string theory works really beautifully on paper, it cannot be tested experimentally. One physicist I spoke to said you'd have to create an LHC the size of the solar system just to begin to start testing whether string theory is correct. So we'll probably really never know the answer to whether it's right or wrong. So as a result, there are some physicists who swear by it and others who won't give it the time of day. In such instances as this, does deciding on whether to believe in theory ultimately come down to faith? Faith in maths, faith in the scientific method, or faith in nature to eventually reveal the answers? Regardless of what you believe, whether you're a Mayan shaman painting on the wall of a cave or a physicist at CERN coming up with hypotheses and methodologies and narratives to try and understand and make sense of the world, this is deeply rooted in human behaviour, and that got me thinking. What would archaeologists of the future make of the Large Hadron Collider? Would they look upon it as a 21st century Stonehenge? Unfortunately, I can't show you the work I'm making in response to my residency at CERN, because having only returned at the end of January with memory cards stuffed full of footage, it's still a work in progress. But if you're still interested, it will be exhibited in August at the Hatton Gallery. So I think it's important to mention here that in preparing to go to CERN and interview physicists, I was going as an artist, not as a wannabe scientist. That sounds obvious, but it's really easy to fall into the trap of being a bit mesmerised by the science and trying to prove that you're not stupid and you've got a brain as well. But I would say that it's important to fight against it, because I think that doesn't always make the best artwork. More often than not, it results in work that illustrates science, which is not something I personally want to do. I think in the context of this evening's discussion about where are we now in relation to artist residencies and my recent visit to CERN, I'd like to end by talking briefly about art science residencies specifically. It is one of the fashionable arts movements of the moment. Almost every week across the world, exhibitions are opening that are billed as art science to cash in on this emerging trend, which is also driven by new funding possibilities from science in the current arts crisis. The arts science aesthetic which has emerged from the 20th century contains, in my view, three strands, which, if they are not kept in check, might result in art being increasingly subjugated by science within future collaborations or residencies. These three strands are art as a communicator of science, art as a means of production, and art as science. First, art as a communicator of science, where the artist represents the science to the outside world. This is essentially art as a publicity and communications tool, and can happen consciously or unconsciously when the artist becomes subsumed by the science. This is becoming critical in the current cash crisis, when artists are seeking new ways of funding their work and science promises new purse strings. Second, science as a means of production, where scientific methods, experimentation and technologies become the channel through which art is processed and made, subjugating the imagination to reductive processes. Third, science as art, For example, when a snapshot of a cell is admired as beautiful, or a chemist's laboratory is found in an art gallery, both instantly become art, daringly crossing the threshold of the art-science boundary, but in reality saying little more than that. There is, I believe, a fourth, more invisible strand, where the arts and science are in fluid interchange, where the disciplines are honoured for their similarities as well as their essential differences, which makes room for both great art and great science. It is within this fourth strand that I want my work to be located. Finally, I want to play you some footage of an interview I did at CERN, just to show that scientists can be the most poetic of all of us.
Is that science has found out something really, really interesting, namely that you, me, everything is made out of tiny particles, you know, called electrons and protons and neutrons. And all these particles, they come from the beginning of the universe, the very first instant, you know, they were produced at that time. And at that time it was extremely hot. And this heat is still contained in these little protons and neutrons, which we are made of, you know, 10 to the 29 is a huge number. But these particles contain quarks and gluons inside in a little prism, and they have still the same temperature as in the moment when they were produced, about a microsecond, millionth of a second after the Big Bang. And these particles are inside of you, and they are absolutely immortal. So everything which is inside of you is 13.78 billion years old. And it will always exist until the end of the universe. It will just change its form. It will not be us anymore, it will be something else, you know, some other object on Earth, living or dead, doesn't matter. It can be a rock, it can be the atmosphere, you know, but it will always be there. And that's an interesting thing, I think.
Thank you very much for listening to me.
Hello, I'm Chris, and I usually live in Manchester, but for the past 2.5 weeks, soon to be 3 weeks, I've been in Newcastle and been based here at the Newbridge. So I'm on a residency right now. I think my research is done through the camera, and I'm just going to talk a little bit about work that I've done previous to this workshop residency. For the past 3 or 4 years, I've been running a project called Unravel, which is a 16mm film project where people can come and draw directly onto 16mm film. And the concept behind that project is that every frame of the film running through the projector at 24 frames a second, we take every frame as if it equals a metre, and we're measuring Land's End to John O'Groats in terms of film length. So it's essentially like a giant tape measure of Britain, or mainland Britain. So that project has really kind of changed my perception of place and, in certain ways, identity, because it's allowed me to interact directly with the public at over 100 and something workshops in very dramatically different spaces, from little tiny art spaces in my hometown in Maltby in South Yorkshire to Tate Britain or Berwick Film Festival, which is actually where we started. And that really has swayed my kind of artistic practice or film practice as someone who's quite interested in engaging with people and learning from people at each space that we're in. So at each workshop with Unravel, we've interviewed people about the place that they're in and what do you like about it, what don't you like about it, and kind of generated a kind of really expanded documentary about the people that have made this piece of work that we've been able to facilitate. And that's kind of swayed my practice into something akin to some form of documentary making, although I wouldn't say that was mainstream. last year I was lucky enough to receive a residency in Nairobi, and I was there for 5 weeks. It was funded by the Gasworks and the Triangle Network. And having never been to Africa, I don't think I'd been outside of Europe or America. It was a very kind of new place for me to go to and to sort of engage with, and I made a 60-minute documentary out of the 5 weeks that I was there. I should say that was not editing the 60 minutes in the space, because that's quite separate to experiencing the place. But I'm just going to play 2 very, very short clips. They're both 1 minute each from that experience that I had in Kenya. And while I was there, just to introduce this one, it was the run-up to the presidential elections, and the last time there was presidential elections before last year, there was a big eruption of violence and perceived tribal violence. So I'll just play this 1 minute film. So obviously there's quite a big thing going on in the space that I'm in for that period of time, and for me to kind of go and experience Nairobi would have been different if I'd have spent 5 weeks there 2 months before or 2 months previous. But at the time there was a lot of apprehension, there was a lot of concern that violence or a big kind of social upheaval might happen, and a lot of kind of yeah, just tension, I guess. And I think because of that time being, while I was there, people were very forward in terms of talking about Kenyan history, Kenyan politics, Kenyan kind of culture, if you like. And that was very good for me, because I was there and interviewing maybe 30 or so people and sort of making sure to make the most out of every day and engaging with as many people as I could. And just going and sort of observing with the camera, which is everything that I wanted to do. So there's another 1 minute section here which perhaps is relevant when you see what I've done in Newcastle. Again, this is just 1 minute. So
I think Nairobi is growing faster than the way we thought. The population was about 1 million in the 70s. Now it's clocking, I think, 4. Since I've stayed in the city for, I think, my lifetime so far, there's a big change in terms of the way people move in town. Early in the 70s, there was a lot of violence at times, people stealing from each other, from pickpockets. It was crazy, hawkers all over. And now people seem to be a bit busy and moving all the time.
Nairobi, I find everybody driven. Everybody's driven by something. Everybody's so ambitious. Even the lady selling vegetables is ambitious. So I find people very aggressive in Nairobi. Very, very aggressive. But the traffic is terrible.
So again, just a clip from a longer film, but I guess now moving forward to coming to Newcastle from Manchester, and my personal history in Newcastle is I've been maybe 3 or 4 times and spent 1 or 2 nights at a time. So essentially I've experienced it before this residency, and I have a general idea of the city. but I'm still essentially, for want of a better word, a foreigner. I'm still experiencing this as a place that I don't necessarily know as much as I will the cities that I've lived in. So I've deliberately taken a quite touristy sort of idea of what it means to come and do this residency. So in the initial proposal, I suggested that I might take a kind of investigation in the kind of impracticalities of what Northern identity is, in terms of like coming as an observer with the camera to a place, which is what I did in Nairobi. So it's a bit of a critique on myself for having done this already in another country. And I'm interested in the makeup of a place and the identity of a kind of collective term for people, and I don't have any kind of non-garbled answers. It's just this was the approach that I've took to sort of have as a strategy to make work, which is very much how I approach work. I just go and try different things. So I think that the main reason for doing that was that in Nairobi, which is kind of a year ago today, but like has really sort of made me think about a lot of things. One of the main points of interest for me was that Premier League English football is essentially such an obsession in certain people that there have been incidents where people have committed suicide or fought to the death because Arsenal have lost a game, or Chelsea have lost a game, or Man City or Man United. And that's everything that people identified with me coming from Manchester. Well, living in Manchester was, what team do you support? And I don't support any or either, but the kind of neo-tribalism involved with kind of the obsessions around football and English regionalism made me want to try and approach that within the work that I made here. So I'm going to show you essentially a very, very rough edit, and edit as in I exported it at 3 o'clock today, but like a compilation or collage or whatever you want to call it. It's just some of the approaches or strategies that I've tried to employ to make work about such a vague identity of Northern identity, and that's in reflection to my own use of that at times, and also an attack on it, and also how my own experience of studying in London and people not necessarily identifying my accent as an English one. I'm just interested in the stories and dialects and attitudes that regions can potentially have. So I'll just let this play, and it is 10 minutes, so I'll just let it go. You fat cocky bastard! Get out of our club! Get out of our club! Get out of our club! You fat cocky bastard! Get out of our club!
Which is nice. Everyone used to talk to me, which is how they knew how to put accent, because they did talk to me. But no, I don't really have an accent, I don't think.
You do.
You do? No. Wait, I do to you weirdos, because you're posh from Devon and stuff. But I'm posh for Durham, though. All I really
posh
do.
For Weardale.
I'm posh for Weardale, but all I really do is I just
speak posh. No,
I don't speak posh. I've got a bit of an accent, and from mixing with people, I've picked up stuff. Like I noticed after working for 3 weeks with Pete, who is he's a sand dancer from South Shields. Do you not know South Shields are called sand dancers?
No, I don't know. What does that mean?
If you're from Newcastle, you're a Geordie because of the miners' Geordie lamp. If you're from Sunderland, you're a Mackem because the saying is in Sunderland they make 'em, and in Newcastle they take 'em because Newcastle is the port. So you're a Mackem. You're Mackem in Sunderland. So that's why you're a Mackem. If you're from Durham, you're posh. And if you're from South Shields, you're a sand dancer.
Has it got a beach? What about if you're from Middlesbrough then? Their accents are really different.
Of way.
I know it's really insulting for people in Durham. Like, obviously, when you go somewhere else in the country or to another country, you always have to say, because I've never heard of Durham, you have to say near Newcastle.
And then they go Geordies. Yeah. But no,
and it's insulting to say to a Durham person you're a Geordie because they're not.
I got called a Geordie once. Me.
That was when you went down south.
Yeah. Your South East accent.
Yeah. I went down, like, it was the first year I moved up here, and I went down and, like, I was knocking back saying Geordie. And they're like, oh, you're from a Geordie, you're from a turn, you're a foreigner, and everything like that to me. I'm like, oh.
Main menu. To listen to your messages, press 1. For greetings, press 2. Or for answer phone settings and features, press 3. For help, press 0. First, saved message. Received yesterday at 3:45 p.m.
Am I proud to be a Geordie? I'm not really. I wouldn't say I'm proud to be a Geordie or a Northerner. I'm proud to be working class though, and I suppose that's associated with being a Northerner. What does it feel like to be a Northerner? No different than it does to feel like a Southerner, I suppose. If you've got difficulties in getting jobs, if you've got difficulties in paying your rent, getting a living wage, we all have these. We all kind of live in the same world. There's no difference whether you're living in the north or the south. If anything, I'm quite aware that it's used as a very divisive mechanism, the north-south divide, particularly when there's information out there in the media about how the northeast is the most obese, the northeast is the most illiterate, the northeast is this, it's that. I think it's used in a way to make people feel bad about themselves, feel unconfident, feel that they are different and there is something not quite right with them. So I don't go along with this view of the north-south divide. Therefore, no, I don't. I'm not proud to be a Geordie. I'm proud to be working class, and I think that sums it up. Thanks. Bye.
I think in some respects my concept of Northern identity is actually just in direct opposition to Southern identity, and that's stemming from a kind of ideological and economic divide that existed from a time that I haven't actually lived in, a place. And I think some of my experience has been more through hearsay than actual experience. Or not even that it was a particular ideology passed down from my parents. I would hear about the kind of north-south divide, but it wasn't actually that different than a north-south divide in my own country. Maybe a bit reversed, but there was still that kind of element of wanting to identify oneself regionally. And I think what's particularly interesting is having come back to visit family in the UK and being made to understand what our roots were, and that it was very much about the working class and working for your living and taking pride in that, versus more economically driven or financial industry in the South. I think that's translated into a kind of work ethic subconsciously I've not even been aware of, in that I certainly take pride in doing something, and I identifying myself with some of that doing and making culture.
I think it's becoming more of a London and the rest of the country divide in some respects. But yeah, historically, politically, economically, there always has been the dirty work, and the poorly paid work, which was often done up here. All the heavy industry. It's kind of reflected on attitudes about the people of the North, because of that, I suppose.
Irrelevant, Lydia, because the north-south divide, which is definitely there, I travel quite a lot to London, reluctantly at times, and I see a different world in London than what I see in the northeast of England. The situation down there is entirely different. There's almost full employment in areas of London. We've got villages here which I think must have 50 or 60% unemployed. We've got the difference in prices, in buying a meal, the difference in prices in going out socially, the prices for theatres and stuff like that. Way beyond the reach of anybody from the northeast of England. Real fares, you know, to get there, to get to London, are just gone up and up and up. We've got a situation where that divide, in my opinion, is getting wider. The small percentage of people, the rich people in this country, have certainly in the last 15 years under Blair and Cameron, that gap has widened, where the people who have so much money get wider away from the people at the bottom who have got less and less and less. In fact, we've got three classes of people now. We've got the people at the top who own the assets of industry, own the money, invest the money. We've got the people in between who call themselves the middle class. They're even feeling the pinch now. You've got people below them who are working for money, or probably less money, that can get them benefits. That's what Thatcher and her cohorts have done to the British working class. I've got people who are young grandsons who were working partly to pay the rent only of ex-council houses who have been taken over by landlords like, you used to call them rackmen at one stage. £90 a week for rent, and one of my grandsons is bringing home £140. You know, £50 to live on for him and his partner and a child. I mean, that is way below any standard of living, any minimum wage. It's an absolute disgrace, and I cannot for the life of us understand why some of these people at the top, the bankers in particular, who have caused these massive problems, are getting more in bonuses than my grandchildren will work for in their whole lives. It's an absolute disgrace.
Yeah, northerner. I mean, that's different things to different people, isn't it? From somebody inside the M25, you know, the old saying is anything past the Watford Gap is the north. You'd certainly find that people from, you know, Sheffield and round there would regard themselves as northerners. From our point of view in Newcastle, Sheffield is almost exactly halfway to London. So a concept of northernness is a bit vague, a bit, you know, I don't know. You ask somebody in Edinburgh where's north, and they'll probably point to Aberdeen and beyond. So yeah, it's all relative, isn't it, really?
Next, saved message received yesterday at 9:15 p.m.
Hello, yeah. Yeah, I'm a proud Geordie. I'm proud of Newcastle. That's from where I am. I'm proud of the heritage of the city. I'm proud of the accent. I'm proud of the location of the city and the country. It feels like we're a little isolated up here, but I like that. I like it that we're kind of an individual race up here. And I think I like a lot of the attributes that I would associate with being a Geordie anyway. Okay, bye-bye.
End of messages.